In the glittering sprawl of Los Angeles, where glass towers reflected golden sunsets and luxury cars glided down palm-lined boulevards, few names carried as much weight as Richard Cole. A tech tycoon who had transformed a small startup into a billion-dollar empire, Richard was admired, envied, and feared in equal measure. His mansion in Beverly Hills was a fortress of wealth, complete with infinity pools, private theaters, and a staff that treated him like royalty. Yet, for all his success, Richard's greatest challenge wasn't in boardrooms or hostile takeovers, it was in raising his only son, Adrian. Adrian Cole was 17, strikingly handsome with sharp cheekbones and dark brown hair always styled to perfection. He walked through his elite private school as if he owned it, wearing arrogance like a tailored suit. Teachers found him unmanageable, classmates feared him, and those who dared stand against him were humiliated in front of the entire school. Adrian's father, busy with business deals across the globe, excused his behavior as youthful rebellion, never realizing how deep the rot had set. By day, Adrian bullied kids from less wealthy families, mocking their clothes, their homes, their lives. By night, he roamed the city streets, drawn to the thrill of rebellion. He fell in with a notorious gang known as the Silver Vultures, a group of reckless teenagers who raced stolen cars and spray-painted their mark across LA. They welcomed Adrian not because they liked him but because his father's money could shield them from consequences. But Adrian wasn't satisfied with petty crimes and cruel taunts. He wanted power, real power. What he didn't know was that the higher he climbed in arrogance, the harder his inevitable fall would be. And when it came, it would not only humble him but expose him to the entire city. Adrian's initiation into the Silver Vultures wasn't the violent ordeal others endured. While most recruits had to prove themselves with risky stunts or fights, Adrian was fast-tracked into the gang because of his money. He funded their late-night escapades, covering bail fees, buying new spray paint, and even lending out his father's luxury cars for street races. His arrogance grew unchecked, as he thought being untouchable in school also meant being untouchable in the streets. The Silver Vultures thrived on chaos. They prowled the alleys of East Los Angeles, scrawling their emblem, a winged skull, on walls and shop shutters. Adrian found it exhilarating. The gang gave him a sense of belonging he never felt at home, where his father's affection came in the form of expensive gifts rather than meaningful conversations. He mistook fear for respect, loyalty for friendship. The Vultures encouraged his cruelty, laughing when he humiliated smaller kids or shoved weaker students into lockers. One night, the gang dared Adrian to prove he wasn't just a rich boy riding on his father's shadow. They pushed him to confront a homeless man outside a liquor store. Instead of showing kindness or restraint, Adrian threw insults, mocking the man's ragged clothes and desperation. His laughter echoed through the streets, but behind the man's weary eyes, there was no fear, only pity. For the first time, Adrian felt a strange discomfort he couldn't explain, though he quickly buried it under bravado. Still, word of his antics spread beyond the gang. Teachers whispered. Parents warned their children. Even the city press began taking notice of the billionaire's spoiled son, who strutted through life as if rules didn't apply. Adrian mistook the growing attention as fame, never realizing the city was preparing to watch his downfall with satisfaction. Adrian's reputation at Westwood Academy had become a storm cloud hanging over the school. Students walked in hushed tones when he passed, eyes downcast, afraid of catching his attention. To Adrian, fear equaled power, and he relished every moment. He would target the shy, the quiet, the ones too timid to fight back. A wrong look, a misplaced answer in class, or even an unfashionable pair of shoes was enough to draw his wrath. His taunts were sharp, his laughter louder than the classroom bell. But there was one student Adrian seemed to despise most, Daniel Rivera, a soft-spoken scholarship student from East LA. Daniel's clothes were simple, his shoes scuffed, yet his grades outshined even the wealthiest kids. Adrian mocked him mercilessly, calling him charity case and pauper. Once, he tripped Daniel in the cafeteria, spilling his lunch across the floor, then sneered as the entire room erupted in laughter. The cruelty wasn't about Daniel personally, it was about Adrian proving to himself that money and status always triumphed over hard work and humility. Teachers tried to intervene, but Adrian was untouchable. His father's donations to the school built new labs and libraries, no one dared cross the billionaire's son. Detentions were shrugged off. Calls to his father's office went unanswered. Adrian basked in his immunity, but beneath the surface, resentment brewed among students and faculty alike. It wasn't just the school. Adrian's behavior in the gang grew bolder, more reckless. He bragged to the Silver Vultures about humiliating Daniel, twisting the story into entertainment. What he didn't realize was that his cruelty was gaining attention from people beyond the school gates, people with cameras, phones, and a hunger for scandal. Adrian thought the world was his stage. Soon, it would become his courtroom. Richard Cole prided himself on controlling every aspect of his empire, but he was blind when it came to his son. His advisors whispered about Adrian's behavior, staff members reported incidents of disrespect. Richard brushed it off, insisting Adrian was just spirited. Yet, even Richard couldn't ignore the subtle changes in his household. Servants avoided Adrian's gaze. Security guards grew restless when his friends showed up. The mansion, once a place of quiet elegance, was now echoing with the noise of reckless teenagers. At a board meeting, Richard's phone buzzed with an alert. He glanced at the screen to see a blurry video of Adrian spray painting a city wall, laughing with the Silver Vultures. The caption read, "Billionaire's son turns street thug?" Richard's jaw tightened. He quickly dismissed the video as a harmless prank, but deep down, he felt the first pang of unease. Meanwhile, Adrian grew increasingly estranged from his father. At home, dinners were silent affairs, Richard buried in business calls while Adrian scrolled through his phone. The only words exchanged were sharp, impatient commands. Adrian craved attention, even if it came through rebellion. If his father wouldn't see him as a son, then the city would see him as a legend, no matter how destructive. But cracks were forming. The gang began to view him differently. Adrian's arrogance, once amusing, was becoming dangerous. He took unnecessary risks, nearly getting them caught by the police more than once. "You think your daddy's money will save us?" one gang member sneered after a close escape. Adrian laughed it off, but unease gnawed at him. Unbeknownst to him, both the gang and his father were running out of patience. The empire Richard had built, and the reputation Adrian thought untouchable, were both about to collide in a storm that neither money nor bravado could stop. The turning point came on a Friday afternoon. Adrian, restless and hungry for attention, cornered Daniel in the school courtyard. Surrounded by a group of cheering students, Adrian shoved Daniel against the wall, mocking his accent, his clothes, his very existence. "You don't belong here," Adrian sneered. "Go back to the gutter where you came from." Daniel didn't fight back. Instead, his silence spoke volumes. He stood tall, eyes locked on Adrian's, refusing to show fear. For the first time, Adrian felt something shift. The crowd, usually amused, seemed uncomfortable. Whispers rippled. Phones were raised, cameras recording. This wasn't just bullying, it was cruelty broadcast live. Within hours, the video exploded online. Hashtags trended, #BullyBillionaire and #JusticeForDaniel. News anchors dissected the footage. Talk shows invited psychologists to analyze Adrian's behavior. Even celebrities tweeted, condemning him. Adrian, who had always craved the spotlight, found himself drowning in it. At home, Richard watched the news in silence, the weight of humiliation pressing down on him. His empire's stock dipped overnight, investors questioning his leadership. His phone buzzed with calls from outraged partners. The name Cole, once synonymous with innovation and power, was now linked with arrogance and disgrace. When Adrian returned home that evening, he was met not with silence but fury. Richard's voice thundered through the mansion, a storm of disappointment and rage. "Do you have any idea what you've done? To me? To yourself?" Adrian tried to defend himself, claiming it was just a joke, but the words fell flat. For the first time, Richard saw his son not as a rebellious boy, but as a reflection of everything he had failed to teach. The world wanted justice, and even Richard's billions couldn't stop what was coming next. Adrian's public punishment was already being planned. The fallout from the viral video was swift and merciless. By Monday morning, the gates of Westwood Academy were swarmed with reporters, microphones thrust into the faces of students who had once stayed silent about Adrian's cruelty. Parents demanded action, threatening to pull their children out if the billionaire's son remained untouched. For years, Richard Cole's wealth had shielded his son from consequences, but now the scandal was too loud to ignore. At an emergency school board meeting, the decision was made: Adrian would face a disciplinary tribunal publicly. The press was invited. Community leaders were invited. Even the mayor commented on the case, insisting that wealth cannot excuse cruelty. On the day of the hearing, Adrian walked into the auditorium with his usual swagger, dressed in an expensive suit, his jaw clenched. But the atmosphere was different. Hundreds of eyes pierced him, not with fear, but with judgment. Daniel sat quietly in the front row, flanked by teachers and classmates who whispered words of encouragement. The tribunal began with testimonies. Students who had suffered under Adrian's bullying spoke out, voices trembling but resolute. Teachers recounted warnings ignored, punishments evaded. And then Daniel spoke. He didn't raise his voice or point fingers. He simply described what it felt like to be humiliated for trying to succeed, for daring to dream in a world stacked against him. His words cut deeper than any insult Adrian had ever delivered. When it was Adrian's turn, he smirked, scoffing at the accusations. But as the audience erupted in boos, the weight of reality finally began to sink in. He wasn't feared anymore. He was despised. The tribunal concluded with a harsh sentence: Adrian would be suspended indefinitely, barred from school events, and required to complete community service under the watch of city officials. Cameras flashed. Headlines blazed. For the first time, Adrian Cole was stripped of the invincibility his father's fortune had built. The suspension was only the beginning. Adrian found himself cut off from the world that once worshipped him. His father, furious and humiliated, confiscated his car keys, credit cards, and designer clothes. The mansion, once his playground, now felt like a prison. Security guards were instructed not to let his gang friends in. The silver vultures, sensing weakness, abandoned him without hesitation. They had no use for a disgraced rich boy who brought unwanted attention. At school, his absence was celebrated. Students walked taller, freer, as if a storm had finally passed. Daniel was praised for his courage, showered with support from classmates and strangers alike. Adrian scrolled through social media in growing bitterness, watching as the world turned him into a villain. The hashtag still trended, memes mocking his arrogance circulating daily. Richard, meanwhile, didn't offer comfort. Instead, he tightened his grip, determined to discipline the son he had neglected. "You wanted to act like a thug," he said coldly. "Then you'll see life outside of privilege." Adrian was forced into community service, cleaning graffiti off walls, sweeping streets, even serving meals at a homeless shelter under the eyes of the very city he once mocked. Everywhere he went, people recognized him. Some jeered. Others spat insults. For the first time in his life, Adrian couldn't hide behind wealth. It was humiliating, but beneath the shame, something unfamiliar began to stir. He saw the faces of the people he once ridiculed: the homeless man outside the liquor store, the children he'd pushed aside, the classmates he bullied. They weren't weak. They were surviving battles he couldn't even imagine. Adrian hated the feeling gnawing at him. It wasn't anger or arrogance, it was guilt. Weeks turned into months. Adrian's punishment stretched on, and with it came experiences that slowly chipped away at his arrogance. Assigned to a community center in East Los Angeles, he spent long hours helping children with homework, cleaning classrooms, and serving food. At first, he treated the tasks as meaningless, grumbling and dragging his feet. But the children didn't care about his name or his wealth. They cared about kindness, patience, and attention, things Adrian had never learned to give. One day, a little boy handed him a crumpled drawing of a superhero. "It's you," the boy said shyly. "Because you're helping." Adrian stared at the sketch, his throat tightening. No one had ever looked at him with admiration untainted by fear or money. For the first time, he saw what respect could feel like: earned, not forced. At the shelter, he recognized the homeless man he had mocked months earlier. Shame burned in his chest, but instead of scorn, the man greeted him with a nod. "People change," he said simply, as if offering forgiveness Adrian didn't deserve. The words echoed in his mind long after. Meanwhile, Daniel volunteered at the same community center. Their first encounters were tense, Adrian unable to meet his eyes. But Daniel, surprisingly, showed no malice. He offered guidance, explaining how he balanced schoolwork with helping his family. Adrian realized that the boy he once called weak was stronger than he'd ever been. Slowly, humility began to replace arrogance. Adrian stopped seeing the community service as punishment and began to see it as education. He listened to stories of hardship, resilience, and survival. He discovered that true power wasn't in domination but in compassion. For the first time in his life, Adrian Cole wasn't the billionaire's son. He was just another boy learning what it meant to be human. By spring, Adrian had changed more than he realized. The boy who once thrived on mockery and fear now found himself humbled by compassion. The community center had become his second home, a place where laughter wasn't cruel but genuine. Children ran to greet him, volunteers trusted him with responsibility, and for the first time in his life, he felt worthy of respect. But the city hadn't forgotten. The media still painted him as the bully billionaire, skeptical of his transformation. That skepticism reached a breaking point when the community center hosted its annual charity gala. Organizers, recognizing the symbolism, invited Adrian to speak not as punishment, but as a chance to prove himself. The night of the gala, Adrian stood backstage, palms sweating. He wore a simple black suit, not the flashy designer brands he once flaunted. In the crowd sat city officials, teachers, classmates, and most importantly, his father. Richard Cole, arms folded, studied him with an unreadable expression. When Adrian stepped onto the stage, the room hushed. His voice trembled at first, but as he spoke, the truth poured out. He admitted his arrogance, the pain he had caused, and the emptiness behind his cruelty. He thanked Daniel for showing strength when he had none. He thanked the community for teaching him what wealth never could, humility. By the end, his words weren't met with boos or laughter, but applause. Richard, for the first time in years, felt pride swell in his chest, not for the heir to his fortune, but for his son who had learned what it meant to be human. Adrian's redemption wasn't complete, but it had begun. The weeks after the gala marked the true start of Adrian's transformation. Back at school, he walked through the halls not with arrogance, but with quiet respect. Gone were the mocking smirks and cruel laughter. Instead, he greeted classmates, helped teachers, and most importantly, apologized to those he had wronged. Some forgave him instantly, others took time, but Adrian understood now that respect was earned, not demanded. Daniel, once his victim, now became his unlikely ally. The two worked together on school projects, volunteered side by side, and even began to form the beginnings of a friendship. Adrian no longer saw Daniel as a charity case but as someone who embodied the resilience he himself lacked. At home, Richard made efforts too. Dinners, once silent, became conversations. Father and son began to bridge the gap years of neglect had created. For the first time, Richard realized that raising a son required more than providing wealth, it required presence, patience, and love. Adrian's story spread, but this time for the right reasons. News outlets praised his public service. Social media shared clips of his gala speech, framing him as proof that change was possible. The same city that once condemned him now watched with cautious admiration. But Adrian didn't seek fame anymore. His satisfaction came from small victories, helping a child with homework, apologizing sincerely, earning a smile where once there had been fear. He had learned the most important lesson of all: humility was more powerful than arrogance, and compassion stronger than fear. For the boy who once believed he was untouchable, life had come full circle. Adrian Cole was no longer just the billionaire's son. He was his own man reborn through H. What do you think of Adrian's journey? Share this story with someone who believes people can change. Comment below, do you think Adrian truly redeemed himself, or was his transformation just the beginning?